My name is Alexei Zomar, and I will talk about .NET Core. I'm not the man who knows absolutely everything about .NET Core, but I have gathered some interesting things that I think maybe even experienced developers as you are maybe have missed. So I'm MVP in Windows development, but last year I'm working with Xamarin and .NET Core, so probably that's Windows development nowadays, going more and more cross-platform. So let's start. So about basic things, I will talk very shortly. So if talk about ASP.NET Core, so we always use dependency injection, yeah? And just very shortly about what is IOC, and so for example, we have a class, we have a main class, and we have a logging class. And we send in some parameter into logging class, you see, parameter 1. No, oh, sorry, you don't say. Moment. So here is it. And logging class, and we send in parameter 1 to this class, yeah? A little bit larger. So that's it. And based on this parameter, there is some logic inside this class, and layer A or layer B return it, yeah? So that's bad, because we have no idea what's happened there. So we send in 1, what will happen if we will send 2 or maybe 5? So what we're doing is we are creating another class, IOC logging, and we are sending instance of layer E or layer B of class we want to use. So, and that's it. Oh, sorry, that was concrete layer. I need IOC logging. And then instance B or instance C is writing text. It's calling method write. Yeah? That's simple about IOC. So what we have did, we have invert our control. Now we are controlling what's happened inside class IOC logging. Yeah? Very simple and easy. IOC is used not only in dependency injection, but also in some other patterns. And very shortly about IOC container. So I have very simple version of IOC container. I show you. That's just a dictionary. And I can register some object, or I can resolve some objects from this dictionary. And what can I do? I can register concrete layer. I can register concrete layer B or concrete layer E, and I can get this object back at any time of my application, of my program. And so what's good? As you can see, new is missing. So there is a well-known mnemonic phrase, new is a clue. So application without new is much more better. So it's much more flexible, much more agile. And we also can easily change, we can also easily change implementation of interface with another one. And of course, you know all these possibilities, yeah? And it's possible to inject just class. And of course, it's better to use interface to have possibility to substitute realization of interface. And what about singleton? It's possible to inject singleton this way. If you inject in singleton this way, it would be initialized on application start. And for codemaniacs, you can use the last options. So everything, all these options are like synthetic sugar, and actually this code. So how to get service? We can get service from HTTP context. Of course, it's not a recommended way. I just provided it as just for your information. And it's possible to use get service or get required service. And the second example is, so as you can see, we are getting iService provider. We have constructor injection, yep, and we are getting service provider. iService provider is actually our IOC container, our default ASP.NET Core IOC container. Yep. So, and then we can get from this service provider, we can get any service. So that's also not a recommended way, but sometimes, so for example, in console applications, it could be used, or it could be used in web applications if you can do anything else. But of course, better to use a classic standard constructor injection to create some private variable, and so do in a usual way. So another one possibility is to use attribute. For example, maybe we don't need our service everywhere in our controller, then we can use attribute and get the service only in some specific action. Yeah? So it's very similar to method injection, and maybe it's possible to create some method injection base with help of this attribute. Yeah, maybe. But if you don't want to have a head pain, if you don't want to think about how to make a method injection, so then you can use any third-party dependency injection providers. Any of them, all of them are already ported to .NET Standard, and it means that they're supported by .NET Core. And for example, with AutoFac, it's possible to use some kind of aspect-oriented programming. So you can instead of writing, for example, it's a very pretty basic example of aspect-oriented programming. And instead of writing in every method, something like debug write line, you can write it only once. And so it will be called with every method call. Yeah? But we have in ASP.NET Core something very similar to AOP. We have middleware and we have filters. Yeah. I have a useless example, because it was written. So, middleware is everything that is running before our UI is loaded. So with every request, something could happen. So for example, with every request, what I'm doing here is I'm writing hello from first middleware, and then I'm writing hello from second middleware. So it's go like a pipeline, like a chain, and it's happened with every request. Yeah. What can I do if user will visit root about? If it visit your website /about, then some method will be called, and he will receive text from middleware. Yeah? And also I can do it based on some condition. I can use map when, and so the same method is called when request contains inquiry word about. That's a useless example. I will show you some useful example later. And filters. And filters, it's very hard to see probably. I'll try to say in words. On the second image, after middleware, exactly with MVC, there are some filters could be run. And you can add some additional authorization with every request. For example, you can use caching to improve performance of your application. You can catch exceptions. You can do varied things with every request. Yeah? That's something that happened with MVC. So if you want to add some filter, you can do. You can add some class, which will be realize interface for example, our authorization filter. And inside this class, you should implement some method. So each filter has own methods, but this filter has own authorization method. Yeah, inside you can check, for example, username. You can check user role, and you can have your own custom logic inside. So after you realize this class, you can edit this way, you can add it another way. And then you can use it with help of attribute. Attribute service filter is one of the attributes you can use. There are some other options, but as you see, it's pretty easy. So some features of ASP.NET Core, which I like. It's maybe my own personal choice. We can create Windows services starting 2.1. And we can use HTTPS redirection. It's help from downgrade attack. Downgrade attack is when the user visits HTTPS version of website, and then he's moved to HTTP version of website. So it's both of those middleware could help from downgrade attack. First one is just from ASP.NET Core, and second one is using HTTP2 feature. So your website should be hosted on some server. And this server should support HTTP2, the second version of protocol HTTP. And then one thing should I mention about HSTS is on the first visit, user is not protected. User is not protected, and there is so known HSTS preload list. So it has websites, it has a collection of websites, it has a list of websites with HSTS support. So you can check this URL and check is your website listed, or maybe add your website into this list. One of the favorite, not only favorite features, is ASP.NET controller attribute. So instead of checking model state, you can just edit this attribute. And of course, GDPR support changes. And here's application. So previously, what was needed to add into existing project identity authorization. It was needed to create some new project maybe and copy files from one project to another. It's complicated, and here's something out of box. I have already added SQL database. I have already did something. And I have already added folder areas. I have applied migrations to database. But now it's possible. To add scaffolded item. And I can overwrite any template, for example, for login page or for logout page. So I can change the design. I can write anything, what I want to have. Yeah. That's it. And the second option that I like is custom cookie authentification. I think it's even better than identity. As for me, because it's possible to use any kind of database. And you also can start from scratch, and you can add it into existing project easily. That was the feature that we don't have in .NET. Yeah. And about features we don't have in .NET, in classic.NET, is view components. We still can use partial views, and we still add view components. What I can mention about them, it's not possible to add script, to use scripts inside them. So because layout is null, and somehow you can add reference to scripts and use them, but it's not the purpose of them. They are not their purpose. So maybe you can use partial views, or maybe you can use Razor components in future. Tag helpers. In ASP.NET Core, it's possible to write code instead of usual HTML helpers. It's possible to write in another way, and this way is supported by IntelliSense. So it's more comfortable for writing, and it's closer to the view. So for me, it's more recommended. So you see, probably you know. Some performance improvements. If you're still working on .NET 2.0, there are some options for you, some reasons for you to move into the future version, because in every version there are some performance improvements, and you can visit benchmarks to see how it's going on. So I think developers are still loving to use JSON.NET, but it was removed in 3.0. It would be removed in 3.0 because 3.0 is still not released. There are some optimizations for JSON and some performance optimization, so it's better just to begin from the scratch sometimes for performance. So it's possible to use UI and interop, unfortunately only from Windows. As Xamarin developer, I would like to have also cross-platform UI, but so currently it's possible to use Avalonia UI, but I think it's still in beta, but I wish them luck. What else? Some new features, some new support for Linux. For example, serial port. It's much more easier to work with serial port. It's much more easier to work with Raspberry API, and there is a possibility to load some library and unload it. Assembly unloadability. Oh, about Selenium. Something about Selenium. I have a simple example. Maybe just show you once again. What is needed to use Selenium, to use our UI automation in .NET Core? Just some easy steps. You can download a driver for your browser. Would it be Linux or would it be Windows? Doesn't matter. Then you should install packages, 2 packages, and then you can write code. Here's application, and shortly about the code. That's the folder to driver, to exe file, as I'm working on Windows. Then I navigate to URL, to some URL, and trying to find element with text next. Then I'm writing JavaScript to be executed. So I'm moving screen to this element. I'm waiting until it would be available. It would be clickable, element to be clickable. And then I'm waiting until page would be loaded. So element is clickable. It's some kind of hack. I don't know. I have no idea how to do it another way, but probably it's not possible to do it another way. So I am waiting until all the text with name P would be loaded. And I make a screenshot. Oh, sorry. So now Firefox should be started. Yep. Page loaded. Now should be moved to next. Next. Oh. And screenshot, that's it. Yeah, a screenshot was made and should be on disk today. Here's it. Yeah. So as you see, that was pretty easy. Oh, it looks pretty easy. So what else we have about our infrastructure? We have ORM. And 2 most popular of them are Entity Framework and Dapper. There are some some different benchmarks around them, but Dapper is micro ORM, and probably it's faster. Probably it's still faster, but it has less possibilities. But there are also fans of another ORMs, So you can use them, any of them. About JavaScript and CSS minification and packages automation. There are two extensions for Visual Studio. One called Bundle and Minifier, and another called Web Compiler. Both of them are from the same person, and it's very easy with help of them to. So, of course, you can configure a gulp, configure a grunt, Webpack, or something else, but it takes the time. It takes the time. So, if you have a small project, or maybe have a bunch of small projects, probably it's easy to use those extensions. So, I have installed it in this project. And you see site CSS. I can minify this file, or I can minify any JavaScript file. And inside bundle config, there is a description of this minification. Or I can compile as CSS. So you shouldn't worry about configuration. You should just think about your code. Yep. And there is also new extension, which is called libman. It could be used instead of npm or instead of yarn, as we don't have Bower anymore. So I show you libman at client side library. And for example, the data tables. And I can choose version. I can choose specific files. Or I can use JSON file. It also has IntelliSense support. I can change version. Hey. And inside data tables, version would be automatically changed. Yeah? No. Because not saved. Yep. And now should be. Yeah, now it is. Or I can even remove this package, this library, and it would be removed. Yeah. What else? And as I have told you, there is a useful example of using middleware. We can add some headers, for example, as middleware to each request. And those are headers I can recommend. First header, it disallows displaying website inside frame. For example, I have some website. You know this website, yeah? And actually, it is displayed inside frame. Yeah? We can publish this website, or maybe some bad guy, some attacker can publish this website. And so what can be done? Transparent layer could be placed somewhere on this website. And when user clicks somewhere, for example there, you see some script is running. But the user could believe to your website. So it's not harmful for website. It could be harmful for website user. It's not a breach in website security. But better to disallow it. Just because someone can create fake website, and URL could be very similar. You know, to create fake website with design like this, with news like this, it's very complicated, yeah? But to get real version of website and to place it inside frame and place transparent layout. So for a couple of years ago, it was a story like when in layer, it was placed a flash button. And after user clicks on this flash button, he wasn't able to see, of course, this flash button. He thinks that he's clicking some usual button. But after user clicks this button, camera was enabled. So it's like a story. What else could be used? For example, it's easy to place over password fields. It's easy to place in other fields. So dangerous, better disable. Better disable displaying your website inside frame. Another one here, no sniff. It disallows sniffing. For example, you have a file with extension PNG, but inside this file there is a PDF or maybe doc or maybe even executable file. So in this case, this file will be not loaded. That's good for security. And the last one is XSX protection. Usually all browsers have this either by default or enabling XSX protection by default, but well, maybe better to have. So what else? As middleware, this also could be added CORS. It allows to run AJAX requests from some friendly website on your website. It could be useful when you are testing your website or you're making calls to production website. That's actually a browser feature. It could be disabled in browser, but yeah, of course, better to add as CORS. And it's not only related to AJAX requests, but also to fonts and something else. Of course, you know about this cross-site forgery request. It's called actually synchronized token pattern. And so if you're using old way of writing or of adding form, then you should add HTML anti-forgery token. But if you're using HTML helper or new tag helper, then you shouldn't. It will be added automatically. And of course, don't forget attribute and don't forget to add token to AJAX requests. Mass assignment. You probably also know about this. And so pretty usual example. For example, we have a class with two fields. This Boolean field is admin. And inside this class, and we have an action. And inside this action, we are receiving some integer and we are receiving some model, this model. And as currently, there is an attribute being name. Only name would be taken from user model, and this action would be not vulnerable. But if to remove it, then it would be vulnerable. So if user calls, make this call, in this case, if to remove bint name, will be returned content breaching API. Yeah, why? Just because by default, value is searched inside root, value is searched inside query, and inside body and inside form. There are some nuances about body and about form, but it could be searched, for example, about complex types. It's actually searched inside body. Some performance improvements. If you're creating some new project and this project is of API type, then of course controller base will be created. But if you have existing project, maybe MVC project, then if you want to add some endpoints, some controller with API, then of course better change controller to controller base. Also, you can use MVC core and add some special things. For example, if you're using model validation, then you should add data annotations. If you're using Swagger, you should add API Explorer, and you can use some additional things. So it might improve your performance of your application. And a little bit about Swagger. There are two packages in .NET Core, Swashbuckle and Swag. Both of them are very simple to integrate. You can install package and you can add just something into your startup file. Or maybe. So, for example, there I'm adding middleware, and I'm adding service, injecting some service. trying to run on the local machine. Oh, yeah. Here it is. And here I'm getting the specification. So, of course, you have worked with Swagger a lot of time. Just want to mention that I can send here also XML, or can get XML. I can get not only JSON by default, but also XML. And here's why. Because I have add into my MVC, I have add any of this serializer. So it's called content negotiation. When you're asking for some special format, for example, JSON is default, but when you're asking for some special format, you can receive this format. You can create also some custom formatters for your application. OpenAPI. OpenAPI was previously Swagger, called Swagger specification. And so it's very easy to use OpenAPI to check for OpenAPI in Visual Studio, not in Visual Studio Code, unfortunately. You can install Nugget package since ASP.NET Core 2.2. So I have installed in this project Nugget package, and everything is fine. If I remove, I will receive a message that I should do some fixes. I should add some attributes. I'm adding those attributes. So every action that returns some kind of type, for example, in this case, it returned no content, and it should be written, it should have the description. It should have the description. Or there is another option. If I don't want to write it any time, I can add my own convention. There is default convention. I have not default, I have my custom API convention. Here is a web file. Here is a class that has some description. For example, if method has suffix by name, in this, and if method has parameter that which name is match name, like there, product by name, it's suffix. And here is a parameter name. In this case, this action will produce no content and will produce OK. So I'm changing default convention to my custom API convention. And I should write anything there. Very comfortable. So, and default class is added, which is called problem details. And you should not invite wheel. You should not think about which class you will return in case of error, in case of exception. You will get this class by default. Here is modules description, and here is class problem details that we have by default. Yep. So if talk about Swagger, everything is simple. And if talk about API versioning, everything is also simple. So we can use any of this type of version, of returning version. And how to do it? You can add package, and you can add something to services. It's a usual way in .NET Core. You just install in some package, and you add in something into services and into middleware. So that's it. But if talk about working together with API and Swagger together, it's not so simple. You need maybe half an hour to configure it, but it also could be used. Yeah, probably I will run again this example. And go to Swagger. Oi. No. And go to Swagger. And as you see, I can choose specification, 1 or 2. And method delete exists in specification 1, and it also exists in specification 2. So when I go and try, I can send API version 1 or 2, which one will be used. Okay. And inside my code, you can see method 1 is deprecated, delete, and the same method, but with v2 added by convention into name, and so it will be called. So if I put here 1, first version will be called. If I put 2, second one version will be called. Executed, yeah? Simple. OData. OData, that's Open Data Protocol that was initialized by Microsoft more than 10 years ago. And you can configure it, and you can use it later. You can use special query language. And for example, in this case, you can reduce overfetching. Overfetching is when you get a model, but you don't need the whole model. You need just name from this model. Yeah. For example, you have a class, and you need just name from this class. So in this example, you're getting just name. So you can try it. It maybe not so easy to configure as Swagger or Selenium, but if it suits your needs, then it's fine. Yeah, also, if you're tired from REST, you can use GraphQL from Facebook previously. And here you can also reduce not only overfetching, but also underfetching. It's the case when first time you're querying, for example, some hero from the database. And with the second query, you should also get his friends, because they are located in another table. So we should make 2 queries. 1 query is not enough. It's called underfetching. So that's it. And there are three not official packages, third-party packages, but I hope it will be more. Maybe someone will be perfect of them. So what we can use as for publishing our applications, we can use Castro. It's recommended to use it with reverse proxy server because of it is one more security layer, and because it can share same API between applications, and also it's much more easy to configure proxy server. And lately, we can use ease also on the Windows since version 2.2. And if very rarely used, HTTP.c only in the case when we need some special feature, for example, Windows authentification. I don't know what else could be also used for this. So, and if talk about publishing, of course, I should mention Azure, because we are on Microsoft conference, and so we all love Azure usually. And so when you're publishing to Azure, you should think about time zone, because your application by default will get UTC time zone. And if you want to change your default time zone, you can get it from the registry, from this path, or you can get it inside your code with this method. This method gets system time zones. Also, if to talk about not only about Azure, but about everything, you should think about request localization. You should think about default culture, because your website might show maybe time in another format and maybe something else. If you talk about Azure and if you talk about .NET Core, of course I should mention containers. I should mention containers, and there are some different options. There is option to use web app for containers, use container instances, very easily to configure, especially using Portal. And there is option to use Kubernetes service. In Kubernetes service, you're paying only for virtual machine. So you can find some cheap virtual machine and can publish some separate images. Oh, wait a second. I have. And also there is options to use Let's Encrypt on Azure. There is extension for websites, for web app, and you can get free SSL certificate for your website using Let's Encrypt. This SSL certificate received for 3 months, and after 3 months you can update it manually, or you can configure a job and update it automatically. Yeah. And Cloudflare is another option to use free SSL certificate. As for me, it's looking like something like a proxy between user and between your website. Yeah, you can read about and you can try it if you like. So I prefer Let's Encrypt. It also can be used with AKS, with Azure Kubernetes Service. And if you talk about Docker, so it's a joke about like almost every song could be played with 3 guitar chords. And but if you talk about Docker, usually I think people are using all these same commands. Of course, it's not enough. But usually every day almost the same. And if you talk about Docker, it's of course I should mention new features, health checks. It's possible to health check database. It's possible to health check some different format of database. And especially it's good when you use microservices. Microservices, I have a small demo. So that's container instance. Oh, wait a second. Let's check. And here's information about my database. And here's UI. Also easily to add UI. It's just Nugget package. And I can see that my database is healthy for 1 day. Oh. So I think that's it. Thank you for your attention.